Hi, everyone. Welcome to the virtual edition of Kentucky Youth Climate Strike's Anti-Oppression Training for White and Non-Black Persons of Color Allies. So admittedly, we did not record this in real time when it was happening. And so we are re-recording the most important the content materials for people to be able to watch and review, but just know that there's some really integral parts of our trainings that we typically include that we won't be including today, including but not limited to some norms that we usually set, a land acknowledgement, welcomes, and then also a closing after we did caucus groups. So know that this is really just the content portion to accompany the slides that we will be sending out. And I want to thank everyone who was able to join us yesterday, and I am also really excited for all of you who maybe weren't able to join us but are watching this in the days after. And really quickly want to just invite the other two incredible individuals who are re-recording this with me and training with me to introduce themselves. But hi, I'm Lily. I use she, her pronouns, and I am based in Lexington, Kentucky. I will pass it over to Fernanda.
Hey everyone, my name is Fernanda or Fern. I use she, her pronouns. I'm based in Louisville, and I will pass it over to Amy.
Hi, my name is Amy, and I also use she, her pronouns. I'm based in Moorhead, Kentucky.
Great, thanks guys. And really quickly, we have two kind of primary outcomes that we hope come from the content portion of this training. The first is that we hope that you'll leave feeling equipped with language and approaches for how you interact and communicate with both yourself, white and non-Black allies and communities, and show up for your Black community and Black friends or family members or allies. And we also hope that you leave with a really nuanced understanding of police brutality and how that is interacting with the statewide demands of Black organizers in Kentucky and how tangible ways that we can really show up for those demands. And so with that, I will pass it to Amy.
Yeah, so the first thing we wanted to do for this training is take a moment to ground ourselves and acknowledge the innocent Black lives lost at the hands of police brutality. We recognize the countless murders we don't know about and likely never will. The list of names is far more comprehensive than this. Say their names. Clifford Glover, Claude Reese, Randy Evans, Yvonne Smallwood, Amadou Diallo, Sean Bell, Oscar Grant, Trayvon Martin, Jordan Davis, Jonathan Farrell, Ayanna Jones, Eric Gardner, John Crawford, Mike Brown, Tamir Rice, Walter Scott, Freddie Gray, Sandra Bland, Corey Jones, Alton Sterling, Philando Castile, Terrence Crutcher, Keith Scott, Jordan Edwards, Stephen Clark, Botham John, Tatiana Jefferson, and most recently, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Sean Reed, and George Floyd. None of us on this call will ever fully understand the experience of the Black community in the United States. Though we won't get into the entire history of white supremacy and racism in this country, we will talk briefly about the development of racist policies. Racism in this country has a history that begins with the colonization and slavery, but extends far after that. It includes redlining and mass incarceration and the war on drugs. Instead, we'll send out a resource list following this training, which y'all will receive tomorrow, and we encourage you to look at it and do your own reading. For this training, however, we simply need to recognize the systemic nature of racism and how it is intrinsically intertwined with the modern society that we're in. Now we are going to watch a brief video explaining what the Black Lives Matter movement is and how it pertains to these issues.
I think what it isn't is positioning of Black people as better than or more important than. I think it's looking at Black life and also the quality of Black life. I think that it is a belief system that challenges the idea that Black people are inherently less human or less valuable than anyone else. I think it's looking at mass incarceration beyond incarceration and beyond police brutality. I think it's looking at housing. I think it's looking at employment and disenfranchisement, homelessness, poverty, marginalization. It's a movement that is about politics, that's about liberation. I think it's a declaration. I think it's a cry. I think it's an intervention. And I think that it is a tool for transformation. And it's not about outrage, it's about responsibility. And I think everyone is implied in that.
We are all here because of the continued police violence and racism against the Black people. This began with the creation of a formal police force in 1838 designed to control slaves in the South. Now, more than 1,000 people are killed by the police every year, and those are disproportionately Black individuals. Black teens are 21 times more likely than white teens to be killed by the police. There are people in this world who rationalize this behavior through misinformation and stereotyping, but we know that is not the reality. This is a clear manifestation of structural racism. Lily, can you read this definition out loud for me?
Yeah, structural racism is the network of institutional structures, policies, and practices that create advantages for whites and oppression and disadvantages for people from targeted racial groups.
Thank you. And here lies the center of the issue, a perception that being not racist is how we begin to undo structures of systemic racism. But it is not simply enough to be not racist. We have to be actively anti-racist. Fern, could you please read the other definition for me?
Yeah, I sent in the chat. Since I'm doing this on my phone, I actually cannot.
I got it.
Thank you.
Anti-racism is the work of identifying and challenging racism in actions, communications, and policies on a daily basis. The anti-racist not only seeks to acknowledge their inherent racism and privilege, but also actively uses that privilege to dismantle systems of oppression.
Okay, now I'll pass it off to Fern.
Cool, thank you. So for folks who are watching this from home, wherever you might be, one question to maybe pause and reflect on before we move on to the rest is, why do you feel personally that it's important that white and non-Black people of color take on the anti-racist work that Amy just described? So we know the burden of anti-racism work cannot fall only on Black people. We're here because this work will only be successful when all of us commit to taking on the problems of oppression as our own, even if we cannot fully understand what it feels like. I think one really important thing to remember is this conversation is not centered on us, but we are an integral part of supporting it. And right now we're in a moment of immense whirlwind against police brutality and the murder of Black people in this country that demands all of our participation. We're seeing peaceful protesters fired upon in the streets, and our national leadership threatened to use martial law. In Louisville, a narrative demonizing the looting and the violent protests that do erupt has been really intentionally crafted, and our participation in that narrative is inherently anti-Black. And this is because it is a narrative that prioritizes property over people's lives and really just ignores the fundamental realities of who is partaking. The Louisville Metro Police Department and the National Guard have tear gassed and shot rubber bullets at peaceful protesters, murdering David McAtee, a community leader. I want to take a moment to just remember his name, his life, and his impact on the community. We hold his memory and the memory of Breonna Taylor today in this space. So in Lexington, there have been nights in which protesters praised police who took a knee and ultimately marched with them. But there have also been nights of extreme unity demanding accountability from these people. In small towns across the state, there have been vigils and marches and protests, and there will continue to be for the foreseeable future. The very reason that we have a world where we are facing climate chaos, the very reason why we have so much inequality in this country, is because America has a deep-rooted belief in this country that some lives matter and others don't. That some people's lives are disposable and others aren't. That some people's lives don't mean as much as others. There are moments that truly define a generation, and that those moments are when it matters most for us to show up. What you do, what we do, it all matters. This is why we feel our role of supporting campaigns and providing resources as allies, as an organization, is crucial. So we're going to move in a little bit to talk about this whole concept of being an ally. So we're all here today because we know that our work is important for the fight and for racial justice, and we're committed to showing up, not simply just engaging in performative action or performative activism. So the title of this training includes the term allies, as if it all falls, as if allyship is all the same, but that's actually where we need to really introduce this idea called the spectrum of allyship, which is shown above on the screen. So the way it goes is it's actor to ally to accomplice. It's only when we understand the distinctions amongst these three that we can commit to the most meaningful action in support of racial justice. So starting with the actor, they assume the need for racial equality, but their actions do not disrupt the status quo. It's much the same as like a spectator at a football game. Both have only the surface level of effect in shifting an overall outcome. The actions of an actor don't actually explicitly name the challenge that the pillars of white supremacy, and they fail to meaningfully recognize it as the source of racial injustice, but they do mean well. An ally is more like a disruptor and educator, educator of themselves and others. Their actions do have a greater likelihood to challenge systemic racism and white supremacy. However, an ally is likely to work towards slow, incremental change, not sweeping reforms. So then the actions of an accomplice. Those directly challenge institutionalized racism, white supremacy, by blocking or impeding racist people, policies, and structures. And in this moment, I think one really clear distinction among an accomplice from the other two is that their actions would be informed by, directed by, and often coordinated with Black leaders. They actively listen with respect, and they're motivated for this idea of collective justice, and not because of any personal guilt or shame they might feel, because that is something we really all carry. Accomplices consent to being held accountable, and that means not acting like alone or in isolation, but rather being really public with what they're doing and bringing other people into their efforts. So as we move through the remainder of this training, we're going to frequently stop to consider what would the actions of an actor be, an ally be, or an accomplice be, and how can we actively be moving towards the status of an accomplice. But I think another question to ask yourself, and being super honest, is to think about where you fall on the spectrum. If you have been doing more of the role of an actor, but you would like to move into an ally, or if you've been an ally and the word accomplice is completely new to you. We all look forward to learning how to work towards being an accomplice together, and want to be clear that throughout this training, we will be using the term allyship or verb ally throughout the training, but know that we are still ultimately working towards being an accomplice. Great. So we can really separate this allyship into two different categories. Lily, could you read the one on the left, please?
For sure. Ways in which we can permanently change our communication and interactions to show up consistently as anti-racist.
Great. So that's thinking about what can we do for the long run, what type of work we'll be doing our whole lives. Amy, could you read the one on the right, please?
Yes. Tangible actions we can take right now to support Black Lives Matter protests and Black organizers.
Great. So we're going to begin by discussing our interactions through the context of ourselves and the communication we need to be having with self. Then we're going to move into white and non-Black POC individuals and communities, and then finally how we can best show up and support Black individuals and their communities. So we're going to begin by offering tools for deepening our individual engagement towards racial justice through kind of 5 expectations we hope that you'll hold yourself to as you start doing this work. So the first is to untrain yourself. We must read, talk, and critically reflect on issues, stories, and examples of how injustice and privilege have shown up in our lives or our communities. And we really need to bear the burden of educating ourselves and how to best be an anti-racist rather than asking Black people to do this for us. The second is lead by example. So come out as anti-racist and invite others to join you. Be aware that this must be more than performative allyship. But when posting on social media, we hope that you'll ask yourselves these questions. Is this providing others with info or education? Does this truly uplift or support Black activists, artists, and or businesses? If the answer is no, then chances are the post is performative. So think posting a Black square, but not directing people to any resources or ways to take action. 3 is celebrate the discomfort. Learning and growing is inherently an uncomfortable process, no matter what it is, but that discomfort should not come at the expense of others. No, this will not be easy, but that discomfort is a feeling that Black folks have held far longer than most of us have had to. 4 is accountability. So be self-aware about your contributions and be ready to accept criticism. Always be trying to get better, and it's okay to be embarrassed, but move on, pick yourself up from that, absorb it, and try not to be on the defensive when people voice a criticism or try to hold you accountable. We know it sucks to try and still be wrong, but we need to remember that this isn't about us. Just use this criticism going forward. And number 5 is take risks, actions that interrupt oppression and injustice, and systems are often messy and rarely neatly resolved, and we need to take the risk to interrupt this cycle even when we are imperfect. So when we share and amplify our learnings publicly, we can shift away from being an actor and into the role of an ally or accomplice. So now we're going to move into talking about white or non-Black communities. And so we know for our work to be effective, we have to bring our learning directly to our own communities. This starts with confronting the reality that we all have internalized Blackness of some kind, and it shows up in our communities. And some examples of this, which some of y'all may resonate with: cultural appropriation is number 1. 2, a resentment towards pro-Black progress. So thinking along phrases that say why don't all of our lives matter? Trying to strip away Black people's complex identities, saying things like, you're not Black, you're blank, and giving other people a label. Engaging in stereotyping and microaggressions. So this is where it's really important to remember, it doesn't matter what your intent was, it matters what your impact was. And of course, saying the N-word. Under no circumstance do we believe that any person who's not Black identifying should be using that word. So another question to take a moment, pause, think about, journal, or just think about in your mind if that works better for you. Or what are the ways in which you see anti-Blackness showing up in your communities? For me, being a part of the Latinx community, I've grown up with folks being really trying to spread rhetoric around wanting to be lighter versus darker. So there was a looking down upon if you wanted to for tanning, or if you were the darkest member in your family, etc. And yeah, welcome you to just take some time and reflect on that. So fundamentally, the actions that we take within our communities are very similar in principle to those we engage with ourselves, and we find strength by educating and moving our own communities that we're a part of. We also need to be anti-racist in our communications with Black folks and communities. That means being cognizant of our language and the impact that it has, and we cannot engage in this thing called racial gaslighting. Amy, could you read just the top section of that slide?
Yeah. Racial gaslighting, which is when we manipulate information in a way that makes the victim question their own experience, memory, or reality.
Great. So I think reading over these phrases, I'm sure many folks are saying, oh my goodness, like I've heard these before, maybe you've said these before. And I want to just like, for you to take a moment and think about where you have maybe heard these things. So folks who gaslight and like use these phrases often do it to try and avoid taking accountability or to avoid feelings of guilt or shame for the fact that they benefit from something that harms others. But I think it's really important to acknowledge that hearing this list of phrases is like the first step in figuring out how to correct that behavior. So a couple of other practices we want to hold for people who are white and non-Black POCs is to, one, not be resharing the videos of traumatic Black folks' deaths, but realizing that that is taking up necessary space that people need for grieving. But we also like want to talk about what we should be doing and not just what we shouldn't be doing. So we need to approach this communication with mindfulness and without the expectation of any gratitude in return. And it's really important to remember that we have to show love and reach out and support to the Black people in our lives, whether that's your friends or coworkers or family. And if they don't respond or receive your message how you wanted, take it in stride. You should be showing up because you care and because you want them to know that they can trust you and rely on you, not because you want and need props for it. And just remember that there's real pain that comes with the manifestation of white supremacy in the US, but it is only through hope that we will gain the strength to continue. We must be thoughtful in the ways in which we process our own grief and support others to do the same while not allowing it to consume us entirely. And I'll pass it back to Lily.
Thank you so much, Fernanda. So now we're going to shift into kind of this second thing that we want to talk about, which is thinking about how we can support Black organizers right now. In Kentucky and across the country, our work has to be grounded in the demands that Black organizers have put forth. It is not our responsibility to critique those demands or the tactics used to achieve them, but to follow Black leadership in this moment and engage in the capacity that we can. So up on the screen, you are gonna see the demands from Louisville, which were put forth by the Movement for Black Lives in communication with organizers on the ground. I would encourage you to take a moment to read these, maybe pause the video. Know that the final two have either been met or are in the process of being met. Metro Council is voting on the elimination of no-knock warrants. There are also demands that have been put forth by Black Lives Matter organizers in Lexington, which are quite similar and specific to the Lexington-Fayette Urban County Government Police Department and disinvestment in it. So I would encourage you guys we know that, these demands in Lexington and Louisville are not representative of the entire community. And so if you are going to be organizing on the ground, we really, really encourage you to first discover the demands of the local organizers in your town or city and think about how you can use those to guide the work that you are doing and really listen to Black leaders. And so, of course, the best thing that we can do to show up to support these demands is to show up in person if we are comfortable, however. In a time of global pandemic, we want to make it super clear that if you're immunocompromised, living with someone who is undocumented, or for some reason should not be showing up to protests, we really do not encourage you to do so. And we want you instead to ensure that you're prioritizing your mental and physical well-being. But if you do show up to protests, make sure that you are looking at protest etiquette for whatever identity you hold. These are really easily available on the web or even on Instagram. And we are going to go over them in subsequent trainings, but will not be today. But also know that protest etiquette is going to vary from place to place where you are. And so always in the moment, follow the leadership of the Black organizers who are leading the in-person events. And if you cannot go to some kind of in-person event, there's still a number of ways that you can participate in active protest at this time. And that actually starts with like a mindset shift in the way that we talk to others about how we're showing up. Rather than simply asking people to show up in person, we can say things like, what form of protests can I depend on you for? Will you write a letter, donate to an org, or publicly display a poster? And how can I follow up with you on those commitments? And up on the screen, we have a few ways of how you can most effectively show up, but know that these again are varying from community to community. And we have a full list of resources in the guide that we will be sending out after this training. And so that's really the bulk of the content that we had for you today. After this section of the training, we moved into caucus groups based on the racial identity that we hold. We will be hosting more spaces like that in the future. Know that this is something that we really encourage you to do on your own, to think about your own internalized white supremacy or how it manifests. And there are really easily, there are just a number of questions that we will be sending out, and you can ask yourself to continue this learning, but know that this is just not something that you can really conduct over a virtual space. And I would encourage you to, after hearing all of that, think about one final journaling prompt. Maybe pause the video and write down a few commitments of what you as an individual can commit to showing up to doing as an accomplice in both the present and the future, and maybe communicate those commitments to someone so that they can really hold you accountable. Thinking about the things that we just talked about, the actor, ally, and accomplice spectrum. And just take some time to do that based on your own personal capacity. So I'm gonna pass it back to Fern in the 5 minutes that we have remaining to really talk about how we move forward from here and what you can do to plug in.
Great, thank you, Lily. So we know that the journey of becoming a good accomplice is one that we're all struggling through, and we're going to do that together. In the coming weeks, we're going to be hosting a series of trainings, continuing our learnings about anti-racism and other issues. If you have any suggestions for a training that would be helpful for you, you can totally let us know. You can DM us on Instagram. We are going to print out a feedback form, which is more applicable to the folks who kind of were in person, but if you really feel strongly about a certain training, we'd still love to hear from you. Right now, we are thinking, they're put up on the screen, but one dedicated to white privilege, a component of which could be that protest etiquette that Lily was talking about. One about community organizing 101, what is it? How do you get involved in it? One for a non-Black POC healing space, just for self-care, to take care of one another. And then one, because we are primarily a climate justice org, that shows the intersections between COVID-19, the climate crisis, and racial justice. So those are the ones we have scheduled for right now. And we really hope to train up as many folks as possible. So one ask that we're having people commit to, if they feel like they can, is to invite at least one other person or invite themselves for one other training coming up in the future. All of this will be on our Instagram and our website coming up, so you'll be able to really easily access that registration. Let's see, I want to make sure I'm not forgetting anything. Oh, so coming out of this training, we're going to have what we call learning circles, which are essentially based off of the identity we have. We're going to have a white one and then a non-Black POC. If anyone is wondering why we are not creating specific Black spaces, it's because we want to make sure we're being really mindful and intentional about the work that BLM is already doing. And so we will be talking to them, and if it makes sense, of course you will have a space dedicated to that community. Of course you will have a chat for that. We just want to ensure that we're not impeding on anything that's already happening. But yes, so coming out of this training, if you registered, we will be sending you a follow-up email that includes the slides to this, a resource guide, feedback form, and a place to register for new ones. This visual really nicely shows kind of the things you might want to hop on if you're curious to continue with this. So one is our social media. It's just Climate Strike KY for all of them. And we do have our YouTube channel, which we will be posting all of our trainings. This one should be up today. A resource guide that has a full list that I'm super excited about that includes movies, articles, podcasts, conversations to have with like kids, so like for parents to use or to use with younger siblings, Black businesses you can support both locally and nationally, and also some group education materials for you to just like continue on with this. And I think that is everything on there. Yeah. So want to close out again with a reminder of why we're here. We're here because of the murders of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, David McAtee, Ahmaud Arbery, and the other countless whose names we will never know. And we're here because creating a just society is impossible until Black Lives Matter, and all of us have a role to play in that and to hold ourselves accountable. So with that, I think we're going to end the recording of this training. Lily, Amy, do you guys want to add anything? Are we good?
Nope. Thank you, Fern. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.